Our first order of business, as always, is the Pledge of Allegiance tonight, to be led by our Central Office MVP, Tyra Pilgrim. Tonight, it's a called budget meeting. It's our only subject, financial matters. And Mr. Director, are you leading us off, or okay?
I'll lead you off.
All right.
As I promised you last evening, because of some of the changes and information we've had in the last several days, before we kind of look at the budget, I'm going to ask Miss Amy Wise, who is our Title I coordinator and really our resident federal program funding expert. She has. And it actually covers more even than Title I. She's our go-to person very often. She's going to begin and kind of give you some updates, and then you're free to ask some questions that she may or may not be able to answer because it's still tentative, a lot of it.
Right, and I told Mr. Odom this afternoon when he said I was the resident federal specialist, and I said, well, that's a good thing because I can't be held to anything I say tomorrow because it may change. It changes daily sometimes, and I think you read the same things I do in the newspaper and the magazine. So some things are fact as of right now, and the spreadsheet that I gave you tells you what our preliminary allocations are for this next school year. As you look, the red, of course, is our sad news. In Title I, we were cut almost $900,000. Title II, almost $50,000. The others were pretty much.
Tell them what Title II does.
Title II is our professional development funds, where we bring in the best and the brightest to train our teachers, or we send our teachers out to get the best strategies to bring back to their children for instruction. So again, it's one of the pots of money that we use so well in Rutherford County. And it's sad to see that cut. And as a matter of fact, the last few articles that I have been reading and then we've been reading in our instruction department is the zeroing out of Title II funds within the next year or two. And that's very unfortunate because that's where we do bring in the best and we train our teachers to be the best instructors for our students. I think that's why we've been with the most progressive and most high-achieving school system, is because of our professional development. But that is what we're looking at. Again, an article that came across my desk today from the Education Week is still saying zero funding, not for next year, we've got some money here, but for the next year. So hopefully we'll see some changes, but as the budget talks go, that's what we're hearing. So,
Ms. Wise, if you would, because we have a TV audience, I would assume, tell us exactly what Title I pays for.
Title I is for reading, math, now science and social studies. It's for all the subject levels in the high poverty schools. We select our schools based on poverty, the free and reduced lunch population every year to qualify our schools. It's actually we hear all the time, nationwide about the gap between the non-poverty children and the high poverty children. There's a achievement gap. This money is to close that gap, is to make a level playing field for the students that live in our high poverty schools. What Rutherford County uses it for is to add instructional coaches above what the county does, add interventionists to for our RTI, our response to intervention and instruction. It pays for a lot of technology so we can get the best technology in front of them. It pays for instructional programs, software, math programs, those kinds of things. It pays for a lot of staff development because our schools have unique needs. And so our professional development for them provides for those unique needs. We use the team rubric when we decide what professional development to bring to the schools. We use our achievement data to see what is the best programs, the best professional development for the schools, always with keeping in mind that the majority of these children come from high poverty families. And so there are some unique needs based on that, particularly with literacy, vocabulary. They don't come to school with those skills, and we have to kind of make up those differences. So that's what this pot of money is to do.
We have 10 schools.
We have 10 schools. This year we picked up 2 middle schools, Laverne Middle and Smyrna Middle. That has been wonderful for them. They have offered so much professional development to their schools, and you can see the culture change in those buildings when you walk in those buildings this year.
I can't believe Ms. Wise forgot one of the greatest things that Title I does is the parent involvement and the stakeholder involvement. I just had to say that because a huge portion of that money, a minimum of 10%, has to be used to keep those stakeholders involved in those schools where you typically don't have that. And I'll turn it back over to her because I know she was thinking
Thank you for that,
of
because
everything, and she probably left. That's the one thing that she does pay most attention to, and I think she just sees it so often she forgot to say something about it.
You're exactly right, and that is the parent engagement, parent and family engagement now is very strong in these schools, making parents feel welcome and to be a part. We give a lot of parent trainings, usually monthly. There's something going on to help parents know how, as our standards change and as the way we change our instruction for our children, the parents need to be informed so that they can help them. We're doing a lot of videoing of teachers that we put on our websites so that parents can see it and know how they can help their children at home. We offer a lot of parent events. A lot of you have been, a lot of our county commissioners have been part of our spring planning meetings at our schools, and that's been so nice because you can see how we use our funds so well in our buildings and what they go to do. The thing about our Title I schools, I can't say, here's what you're going to do with your funding. Mr. Odom can't say, or the principal can't say, here's what we're going to do with these funds. It has to be a school committee decision, and that school committee is made up, of course, of the administration, of teachers, of parents, and community stakeholders. And so that's the nice thing, that everybody's a part of the school, and so many of you have been to these meetings, so you know what we do. And so our first part of those meetings are always a little commercial for the school to show the good things that are going on. We also tell you the things that we need to strengthen, and then you help us plan the budgets and what this federal money goes for.
Tell them about Title I-D. It's not separated here, but many of them may not realize what that's used for. You had a webinar this week on that.
Yes, Title I-D is money for delinquent facilities. Our facility in Rutherford County is the Rutherford Detention Center. For the last many years, that money has been turned back over to the state and contracted with a third-party vendor. That is no longer going to be the practice in Tennessee. So our department will take over those funds, and it's a little bit under $200,000 that will provide transition training, instruction, so that these children that are incarcerated while awaiting adjudication, awaiting what the court will decide that will happen to them, we work with the schools where they come from, and we provide the instruction so that they won't be behind in their studies once they go back to the school, or if they're incarcerated, we want to make sure their education goes on so that they can be good, responsible citizens once that time is over. So that's our Title I-D, and that is new money for us this year. Title IV, you can see on this spreadsheet, right now has no funding. That was funding that was promised Rutherford County was supposed to get about $150,000 for that, and that's when if you listen to about ESSA, our new law, they talk about well-rounded students. It's not just about reading and math anymore. It's about the students being well-rounded, ready for college and career. This is a pot of money that was going to be new this year. They still say we probably will get some. Of the billion that Congress was looking at, the Senate's looking at just several $100 million nationwide. So right now, they just haven't put it in at all, not knowing what's going to happen. But hopefully, they will put some in. But we need a good deal because that's a big definition when you're talking about helping the well-rounded education. So we're hoping to get some eventually of that. Like I said, we're supposed to get about $150,000, and hopefully that will be something that will come soon. But right now, the state is afraid to predict that we will get any. Right now, they're just, because of the continuing resolution. We're always, federal is forward funded, and so we're always at the mercy of a continuing resolution, that vote, to keep us going. And of course, that vote for continuing resolution won't be until April 28th, or is supposed to be April 28th. And that's why I think the state has taken a very conservative look at our preliminary allocation, because they don't know what that continuing resolution will look like, because they don't just do a yes or no vote. They can actually change the numbers before they do that yes vote. So continuing doesn't necessarily mean continuing at level funding. So the state is being very conservative at this point, and I think that's probably smart at this point, because we could be, I've looked at, in the readings that I've done, I've looked at up to 10% cut perhaps, even if the continuing resolution does go through. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see toward the end of this month.
Title III, that's one they may not know either.
Yeah, Title III is our English language learning money. They had a slight they have a slight increase in the funding, but I don't know that that's necessarily a true increase because our population has grown. So I think our increase came because we have more students in that program. They're also going to 1:35 teacher-student ratio, which will mean we need more EL teachers this next year to meet the state and federal minimum for that program. It's been 1:40. The other two pots of money that are on here is the IDEA Part B, which of course IDEA is our special education funding, and our special ed preschool funding, and you can see that it's basically flat, it's basically level funding. It's what we've got in our preliminary allocation for planning for right now.
That may be numbers of students there.
Exactly.
But we are solidly funded through the end of September in all of our titles, that at the end of federal fiscal.
Right. This money that we are using for what I call FY17 money goes through September 30th. And what we do once July 1st hits, we pay for things through carryover funding. It becomes a pot of money of carryover until September 30th. But our new funding always, by law, must start July 1st. So hopefully we will have some issues. And we say hopefully, we've never really been in this kind of prediction. But hopefully by July 1st, we'll know more. We'll know about the continuing resolution, and we'll know exactly where we are with this. Did you?
I did a couple of questions, if I may. On the Title I funding, I know you mentioned earlier that we've added 2 new Title I schools. When you said that, were we talking about in this current school year that we've
Yes.
added 2 more?
Yes.
So this $894,000 that we're possibly projecting that we're going to take a hit on, was that from the numbers, is that, I mean, does that reflect what's being funded for those two schools now, or is it perhaps even worse than it looks, I guess?
The number of schools that you qualify doesn't have anything to do with your funding. You get the amount of funding, and we just prorate it out with the number of schools that we qualify.
Factor into their,
It does not. We get our money based on the census poverty numbers
okay,
for the system, for the county. And so that's what the allocation is always based, that's what the formula is based on, is the census poverty. Now, we qualify schools for Title I based on free and reduced lunch population. Last year, when we chose to pick up the 2 middle schools, we actually dropped the bottom 2 elementary schools. We dropped Walter Hill and Stewartsboro at that time, because you want to look at your money and see, you don't want to spread it so thin that you offer schools such a little amount that it's not going to make a difference. So, we looked at the programs that were going on with GP funds. We looked at everything that was going on in the buildings. We looked at the poverty numbers, looking at Laverne Middle and Smyrna Middle at being in the low 70s of poverty, and just felt like this was the right time and that the need was there, that we needed to pick them up. And so we dropped those 2 bottom elementary schools, which Walter Hill was in the mid-40s, Stewartsboro was right at 50, and just found the bigger need because the funding doesn't change.
one other question, I know you've referenced a couple of times getting the numbers and final things from the state, but now our Title I funding is all federal dollars, correct?
Right, but it's filtered through the state. The
Right.
state actually is the one that provides our allocation.
Okay.
It's all federal money, but it's flow-through money. It flows through the state, and the state has the formula based on the census to then divvy it out
Right.
to all the systems based on that census
And
information.
that's what I thought, but again, I think clarification for
Sure.
audience, because I know I've had, people recently asking
Right,
to
absolutely.
explain what the Title I funding is
Sure.
for and where it comes from. So just for clarification, it is actual federal funding.
It is actual federal funds. There are no, when you look at special education, they get state, federal, and local dollars. Title I is only federal dollars.
Okay. Thank
Does
you.
that,
About the state holdback, you don't have it here, but this group kind of needs to know.
right, in the, last year, the set aside for the state for schools in need of improvement, the feds allowed a 4% set aside for the state to use to help those schools that were deemed in need of improvement, which Rutherford County doesn't have any of those. But 4% went directly to that set aside. This year it's 7%. And so part of that cut is because the feds now require a 7% set aside at the state level. So part of this 18% is that extra 3% that the state now keeps for schools that are in need of improvement.
Blair?
I'm going to quote Mr. Holliday from last night. Mr. Young did it also. So, Mr. Holliday said last night that with ESSA, we have flexibility that we've never seen before. Are there mandates that have financial ties to them that money could be moved, that federal money could be moved around, where it could not in the past, possibly it could be now?
That's a great question, and there are some requirements. With federal money, there's always requirements. Even as flexible as it can be, there's always a lot of requirements with it. The thing about what we have with ESSA is we have no guidance. We had guidance starting in June. We were getting some guidance on the new law. In November, we were given some guidance on the law. In January, they took all the guidance away. So right now, we are bound to the interpretation of who's reading the law, the letter of the law. We don't have guidance, so we've not really been in that position before. But as far as the requirements that we do know that we have to follow, 1% of our money must be spent in parent involvement, 90% at the school, 90% of that at the school level. Our schools are all school-wide. They use their funding to help address needs at the entire building. And so they usually, if they have the funds, they put more than the required amount of funding in parent engagement. Everything with our federal money must be supplemental. The county must do, the state must do whatever it is required to do, and then these funds can be used for above that. Once we qualify schools, then only these schools can receive the funding for that. Does that help?
I was hoping there may be some opportunity to rob Peter to,
Right. That doesn't usually happen with Title I funds or with very little with federal funds. Now, Title II is used throughout the system. Title II is not bound to a poverty number or poverty schools. Title II is bound for the definition of professional development for teachers and for administrators. And so that can be used system-wide, but only for professional development. Title III, again, only for our English language learners, but system-wide.
I would just hope that if there is an opportunity to be flexible to do something that you haven't done in the past because you were handcuffed by federal statute,
Right.
that if there was an opportunity for you to do it differently for better utilization, I hope we would take advantage of that opportunity if that flexibility is there.
A lot of flexibility, I think, comes with these schools in how they spend their allocation as far as it can now go. It used to be only reading. In years past, when the money first came, it was a reading. It was for reading. Then it was opened up to reading and math, and now it's that well-rounded education. And so it can be used, schools can use their money for STEM, or they can use it for science and social studies. Of course, we still know that our need of our high-poverty students is going to be literacy and numeracy. But the schools have more flexibility within their allocation of, as long as it's supplemental, as long as they get what the county is supposed to give them, then they can use it a little more flexible as far as making sure that we meet the definition of well-rounded education for students and for parents. And there's always a parent part of that.
Board?
I guess for people that might be watching on YouTube or TV or whatever, the net of the difference right now for the federal monies, we're not talking about food service and anything like that, but tied through these title program for us was about almost $886,000 reduction, or 7% less, is our preliminary numbers.
And again, it's preliminary, but, you know, I think the state is correct in being very conservative at this point, waiting to see what happens. This is also without our carryover, which our carryover will probably be somewhat less because our schools have been so good about making sure they're spending their money throughout the year, and that's what we want.
It's a little strange thing to me when I came, I've adjusted to all in all. When you see in the report card federal funds, you are seeing 1/4 of one federal fiscal year and 3/4 of another. Just keep in mind, so it's not an apples to apples with, this is the Title I allocation this year, and the report card, it would be a blend.
Because the federal year starts on October 1, the state year starts on July 1. That's what you're reading. Thank you.
Whoa. Let's assume that this happens. I'm sure, knowing you as I do, you've thought way ahead. You've got to have some ideas as to how do we react to this. What do we do? Do you have any? Go ahead.
Our system actually is picking up 7 positions throughout our schools that are losing positions. So they're picking up 7 of the interventionists, so 1 per elementary school they already do, and pick 1 up in one of our schools. So that's helping. So the loss of personnel, I think, is the first thing that came to my mind. And we had a meeting together with Mr. Odom and the assistant superintendents to discuss what the system can do. And so they're picking up some of the positions so we won't have that loss. So detrimental, we may lose some educational assistants because of it right now. Hopefully, if we get more money in July, we can put some of those back, is what our hope would be. Our schools have used their money so well, and I always tell them, honestly, I've told them every year, get what you need, look ahead, because this is soft money. It can come, it can go, so we want to use it well so it can have a lasting effect. And our schools have really done that, particularly with their professional development and with their technology. So as hurtful as it is, we've got some things in place. We've got some really good technology in our buildings. We've got some really good software in our buildings, really good programs in our building. That will have a lasting effect. I can't say it's not going to hurt, but we have looked at it every year thinking, let's look ahead, what's going to make the most difference and will have the most lasting effect, not just for a year, but for longer than that, for what we can sustain longer than that for our children. So that's kind of the best answer I can give you.
You dropped a subject, for instance, say social studies. Would that have a major effect, or would it take more than that?
Most of our schools are looking at science and social studies with our funding as an integrated into reading and mathematics. They still, because the need is so much in literacy and math for
Right.
students, that they're still focusing on those 2 subjects mainly. And they bring in presenters for science, for their students, they bring in some technology, software programs perhaps for science and social studies. So it's not necessarily that they're spending so much money on social studies, they're really still spending the majority of their money on literacy and math, just integrating the other subjects in there.
I kind of feel a little bit like, to quote Mr. Holliday again from last night about the CT funds. We've made such major progress, such great things have happened in that area, just like this one, that to lose funding, and the federal government sends us such little money anyway for everything,
Right.
that it's just inconceivable to me that we should have to go through this. Or of course, we won't go through it; our children will.
Right. We always run as fast as we can. We always step up to the plate. We did it with No Child Left Behind. We'll do it with ESSA also. I mean, that's what we do. But it hurts. But our schools are still going to be using these funds that they have to the best of their ability. I think what the system, honestly, my prediction is what the system is really going to feel so badly is when we lose our Title II money. If we lose our Title II money, that is really going to be very hurtful for what we can bring, because we want our teachers to always have the best that research says to give your students. And I think that is one of the things that our system is really going to, it's really be detrimental to our system.
And as we see that on the horizon, as we're looking at that proactively, as we so often do in Rutherford County, I would suggest that we need to be advocates now that the 1819 state plan that gets sent in would have a provision that opens up Title I funds or Title III funds, or but that the Title II priority of professional development, of teacher training, of continuous education for those who are tasked with the ever-increasing job of educating students, that provision be reallocated into one of these other categories so that we can still accomplish the task, even if they want to eliminate the Title II category or something like that. The priority is still justified.
I think one of the things that we have been doing, we've moved a little bit this direction, is the DI conference, differentiated instruction, call it different things now, where we have about 1,000 teachers attend and that sort of thing. We're using more of our own people to teach the sessions, which we do pay them a stipend, but it's much cheaper than flying somebody in from out of state or something like that. So we're increasing that. These are often people that the state has trained on the new standards, or they've served on some state committee or something. They bring back and share with their peers here. So that's really a hefty percentage of our people this year are actually going to be our own people, our best, really there in front of the other teachers. The other thing that sometimes we were able to, of Title II, is give schools some money for a specific need. If a high school had a need that they identified that they needed to get teachers more training on how to prepare students better for the ACT, they're questioning in their classroom that might go across math or CTE or English or any other, how can we restructure our things that'll help students answer these questions better? Then they could bring in somebody that was trained in that. We'd give them some monies to do. Now, that's the pieces that you may lose quite a bit of, is being able for individual schools to be able to go out and tailor-make what they need or what they view as their need in their school. We'll miss that.
And I heard about that at Laverne Middle School when they were doing their planning for title money. They were talking about the culture that they were creating at Laverne Middle School based largely on a training program that they had been fortunate enough to be able to use these funds to send a select group of teachers to, and they came back invigorated. They came back inspired. And that it was rubbing off on others in the faculty, but the goal was next year we want to send 20% more faculty to that. The same number, not those same people. Right. They got the training. Now we need another class of those people so that we have more inspiration in the building, more new ideas, more energy and commitment to excellence, regardless of what the challenges are, because the challenges walk through the doors when they get off the school bus. Those are the opportunities for inspiration, but the faculty need that kind of inspiration and motivation.
And our schools look at that, and as far as our Title I schools will look more and more at professional development with their funding. You know, I think our vision at one time, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that in this grave red marks here, will go away, and we can pick up more schools with Title I funds, some more of our poverty schools. We can't when we're looking at almost $1 million in cuts, but our schools are looking more and more at how they can use their Title I funds for professional development, because it goes directly to the schools for them to plan with. What we can't do is transfer out of Title I into another program so that other schools that aren't Title I can use that money. The law doesn't allow for transferability out of Title I. So it's always going to be for those schools that are qualified. Title III is the same way. It's always going to be for the English language learners. They don't allow for transferability out. What we can do, though, when we look at those funds, is how we can use them as professional development for those teachers that have these children.
Probably one of the more common ones that I've seen schools use in recent years is the Ron Clark Academy in Atlanta.
And that's
That was the
exactly
one.
what,
Remember,
that's
okay.
exactly what
I
it's
didn't know
on.
He wrote it was the big turnaround, and it was higher poverty students. It was students with lots of deficits and needs, and they were so successful with it that when we would give Title II funds to a school, they'd often send a team. Did you do that when you were at? Well, why don't you talk instead of me? Because I haven't. But they would send teachers to see how they kind of set up things, scheduling, how you increase that parent involvement, how that student involvement, how you motivate students, and picture's worth 1,000 words. But if you lose your Title II funds, and with this reduction, more of our Title II will have to do the DI conference to train the masses. We're gonna have less monies available for schools to go do, unless you're Title I, you may still have some, but to go and do that themselves, to look at something they've identified that's a need.
And what we always do is look at schools that are high performing, such as Cedar Grove, and we send teachers there to see and observe other teachers. And so a lot of things that we can do those kinds of things always, is have those teachers observe our really good teachers.
Blair?
Last question. Has the corporate grant or grant money in general, has it pretty well dried up, or are we in a position where we're not high enough poverty to get some of the grants that may be out there?
That's a great question too. Our census poverty, because we have a lot of jobs and a lot of growth here, our census poverty actually is very low. And so there's a lot, even with Title I, there's 4 pots of money with Title I. One's called a concentration grant. You have to have in your census poverty over 15% to even get that pot of money. And we, as long as I've been in this position, we have never qualified for that money. Most of your grants, your large grants, not only are for high poverty schools, but you also have to be a school in improvement to be able to qualify for a lot of those grants. And that's a position we're using this money so that we don't fall in that. So a lot of it is we've looked at we look at grants and we say, but we're not a school in improvement and we don't want to be. So it's usually kind of a two-thing, high poverty as well as a school in improvement. So we look at grants all the time to see if we would qualify for any of those.
Can't ask Bill Gates for $800,000.
Well, we can always ask, but that's probably not gonna. But and you have to look at the grants, how much time and effort it's going to take to write those grants, and then to make sure you're following those funds and making sure you have the staff. If you get a lot of money, one of the things that's been cut is the school improvement grants at the federal level. That's another pot of money that's been zeroed out. So, it's just a little frustrating, but we keep looking.
At the teacher level here, probably the most common is that BEP mini grant that Nissan basically funds. The teacher get $200 to $500 or so. They write their own grants each. Do that twice a year. There's another one coming up in May. So that's corporately here in this area. Jenna Stitzel with a number of those. She's over $1 million in the walking tracks. And there's a number of others. I know Ms. Williams back there can tell us more about that. There's really quite a few grants, but in general, because we're not inner city, extremely high poverty, very often that's one of the first boxes you check. It's just a fact.
Other questions, comments from board members? Thank you, Ms. Wise. Again, look, we're always thanking you. Mr. Director? Yes, sir.
Chairman, just kind of related to Amy's comments on the poverty issue. At least once a year, I get the question, well, why don't we pursue some of these low-interest bond borrowings for building construction? And just if you get the question, our poverty levels are too high for those programs, and our debt rating is our credit rating is good enough that even if we did qualify, we typically are able to borrow at a lower rate than we would have in those programs. So that's why we haven't pursued a double reason for us. But you may get that question.
Let's take a look at some of the technical things about the budget very quickly, just some general information for you. The budget this year is based on an approximate 3% increase on student enrollment. Year-to-year date, I checked it today, we're up plus 2.81%. Actually, the growth was exactly 1,200 sometime earlier today. That varies daily, honestly, but that's what we're seeing right now. We still do not have firm revenue estimates from the state. We hope maybe as early as by Friday we'll get some from our local sales tax and local property tax estimates. The revenue side of the budget's still not in place. That's what we're saying. And we really haven't gotten anything much from the state yet. Mr. Sammy will get that later. Tonight's handout we're going to look at is going to kind of summarize a lot of these areas being scrutinized for increased funding. The budget that you'll see tonight basically is showing a 7.1% increase. And this excludes approximately $11 million from our ending fund balance. If you remember, for the last several years, before my time and the other, we've had to use ending fund balance to make it, set aside some of that to make it balance the revenue side with the expenditure side. There's about a 13.2 million overall increase shown in the budget. Rocky Fork opening is going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.6 million. You know, so that jumps in this year, which is different. So if reductions in the budget are required, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of my philosophy and how we look at it. My recommendations in priority order will be, number one, basically to sustain current effective initiatives. You know, try not to lose ground with what's really working for us very much. We must address any state pupil-teacher ratio requirements, because you can lose more funding, and that's your class size, plus the big one this year that you see is the one Ms. Wise also mentioned, was the one for ELL. That's going to require at least 13 teachers for us to go from 1 to 40 to 1 to 35. So that's what I'm talking about in that. The other thing, we must anticipate growth, so that's kind of that 3% growth that has to be built into the factors. And then kind of lastly, you consider improvements, and that's why even in your initial look at this budget, you did not see a lot of new initiatives out there, because it's simply just handling our growth is the biggest factor that we might have. I'm going to ask you if you'll stop. We'll start with this, and you've seen this before, but we've added some things to it, is this budget considerations. If you'll pull that one again, you saw this on March 16th or something like that. A few adjustments in it, some more notes, some explanations to kind of what it is. So I want to kind of start with this, where you flip to page 4, the last page, where I had a little room. At the very bottom are some notes. Before we go into this, I'll kind of point those notes out. Again, state and local revenues still being formulated year to date, about 2.81% enrollment growth. We're currently not aware of new state cost-sharing requirements that may come with the state's final budget is released. I was reading today, which was really kind of interesting, Chalkbeat. A number of you get Chalkbeat. The bill that's going through the legislature talking about additional PE time and PE teachers. The elementary students would have to spend more time with a PE teacher, not just play. The state had no physical note, but Chalkbeat named 3 school districts in West Tennessee that the combined cost of them will be $253,000. We haven't considered any of that. If that bill passed and has to take effect on July 1, that may be another unfunded mandate, because I don't know how many PE teachers it'll take for all of our schools to meet that requirement. But that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying that we do not know. Another thing which is really good news, kind of from this, it's not great news, but it's good news. We talked last night about the 103,000. Basically, as we look at that and break it down, there's a 23,000 reduction in recurring costs. What Ms. Pilgrim was telling you last night was some of reserve grants in the past, which are kind of annual anyway. So there's like 80,000 or so tied to that. But that money, what we did with that is still a loss if you don't get one of those grants, because that's what we bought equipment with. We didn't use reserve grants fundings to pay for people, typically, because one year you have it, another year you don't. I can remember when Ms. Nixon was back there, she'd apply and they would tell her, no, you got a grant last year, I got to give it to somebody else. So when you start looking at those special grant things from the state for CTE, sometimes they just move it around. So you just don't know. And so that's and she applies very diligently and has gotten lots of money, but you never know.
Mr. Odom, if I could, for anyone who's watching, this is a fundamental budgeting concept that this board has used for a long time, that one-time monies go to lasting residual impact and recurring monies go to personnel and recurring expenses. It's just such a simple philosophy, and yet it makes so much sense, it makes such an impact, and it prepares us to be able to handle these kind of circumstances where we can still teach the shop class in theory. The problem is we're going to be challenged by the consumables, the things that you put your hands on for the real life experience that get eaten up in class time. That's where we're going to feel it in the classroom. The teacher will still be there, the course will still be there, it's just going to be less effective, and it's a genuine concern.
Well, that's one thing Ms. Wise was saying about the monies that's not directed to a person. Over the years, many of your Title I schools have put those different projectors in their room that actually connect to the internet, or have been buying a piece of software that lasts multiple years. So our people are pretty good about doing that. The last note, based on our discussions last evening, the certified safety coach, just to give you an idea, you're looking, it's based on a BS in 5, and then if you stay with the 22% for the what you pay a high school football coach, you're looking at a little over $10,000 for each of those positions. Now, Jeff went ahead basically, and we didn't create a separate line item for that yet, but we can discuss it when we get to that tonight. He went ahead and built in the supplement line item, which is on your big budget, another, at least for another one position, but we can add others, okay? I just wanted you to, since Mr. Hodge brought up the cost, we want to talk about that. So let's go back to page 1, and let's kind of go down this, stop me, talk about it, make changes. Again, it's easier to look at because these are the real changes rather than this very large budget that you have of multiple pages. So again, the growth in instructional positions, we teachers, we put 41 basically there, 3% enrollment growth. The 41 doesn't include, the reason we were able to lower it, we're using 22 vacant positions. You know, that was, and again, I explained that to you last time, I'll repeat it, that over a year, and incidentally, you may be interested to know this, Ms. Barnes told me yesterday that our number of retirees this year is almost 100. That's the largest I've seen.
What was it this last year?
Certified people, about 100. It's approaching 100. I sign some every day, just about.
No, but I guess the year before, where were we at on retiring?
70?
Wow, pretty big jump.
So in that particular, I think you saw the other day, you saw maybe like 36 or so. We think with 41 we can do it. We are doing this, as Ms. Wise, 7 teachers due to the federal cuts in Title I schools because those schools must prepare their budgets. I had asked Ms. Wise to go ahead and communicate with them when they got this word last week about these cuts coming, to go ahead and communicate with them and say, we will build in our budget to cover at least 7 of those teachers that are being cut. Right now, as of today, we do not see a certified teacher being cut, even with the Title I budgets, if we add these positions in. That's why I'm recommending we add those 7 in, so that those schools can continue. Again, in that, I don't have the bill in the legislature about the PE, and I mentioned that earlier, so that could certainly change your 41. You know, our elementary schools are so large, very often we have 1 to 2 PE teachers there, but if you have to give them a 30-minute twice a week for the number of classes you have in your building, you could really, we could come up with a couple of dozen PE teachers required, or 20 or so, real quick.
Let me ask an unpopular question. Is there a pupil-teacher ratio that is specific to PE?
Yes, the same as whatever grade level class it is.
Really?
Once upon a time, band is still loose. Typing would let you carry more. They brought PE at one time could double up, but no longer. If it's in K through 3, it must be 1 to 20. If it's 4 through 5 for it's 1 to 25, and if it's above that, it can be 1 to 30. But you must maintain the same PE ratio that you do in the academic classroom. Wow. So, and will that pass or will it not? I don't know. It just surprised me when I saw it today that it moved out of the committee and gone another step in the legislature. So we'll have to see. The teachers for Rocky Fork, that's an itemized thing for you. Let me explain the last column. I meant to do that. The last column, and I've got you a little thing at the bottom. If I've put an X in it, I've put the word keep. That's almost something we cannot adjust in any way. I mean, those are almost minimum things that we can't deal with. Not that it's totally impossible, but no, you probably can't. The down arrow is one that we're going to need probably some of or something, but we might be able to, if it comes to it and we have to lower our expenses, this is an area that could be looked at. When I told you about my priorities, they typically tend to be new things or something. The question marks are those that are basically new programs we're talking about, that if we don't want to improve, if we stay really status quo, that would be the program that we haven't necessarily had in the past that we'd have to look at, depending on how many dollars you have to reduce. So I just kind of gave you a code, okay? So I thought it would help sometimes. We talked about it, and you can assert or whatever you want to in that. So looking at the teachers for Rocky Fork Middle School again, 17 classrooms, you've got your art, music, band, RTI, all of those things positioned. I don't see that really as negotiable. 26 there. If you're going to put the same thing in that school, which we promised our people when we did our zonings, that we would staff them like we do the others, and it'll take that. So that's $1,664,000. English language learners, basically what we're saying in the note there, that's that going from 1 to 40 to 1 to 35. Jeff pulled 8 vacant unused positions. We add 5, comes to a total of 13. So it is either, but new monies required are only the new monies for the 5 we're adding. You see, the ones that we carry over, again, comes from if a retired teacher, somebody retires or takes maternity leave and their master's degree and you replace it with a BS, they're dollars. And so in a school, when you have 3,000 certified people, that accumulates over the years. And another thing we do too, when you see the numbers here, principals still have to justify the positions. We're making estimates in February for next year, not knowing what enrollment is. So sometimes if we overestimate a little bit, then some of those positions are not used. But they were actually funded the year before, so now they're coming and showing up here. They don't go away. They really stay in the same category, but they come back to help you accomplish what you're trying to do. The music and art, we really wanted to expand that. That's one that the expansion there, the Rocky Fork Music and Arts already covered, got a question mark there. What is really driving that is we're seeing middle schools with huge numbers of students in band. Once upon a time, we funded 2 music band teachers at middle schools. I think Mr. Gill, in one of his cut years, had to cut them out, and they're back to 1. And some of them have 1 to 1.5. Yeah, right, 1.5. And they have to share in some of that. This would improve that. Can we afford $307,000? I don't know. That's again what we look at. We want to do it. Where are we? I know your position. Go ahead.
Well, but I'm going to share with you that my position is that when we had to cut from 2 to 1, when we went back to 1.5, we went back with a level allocation. No matter what the participation level was at the school, we outfitted everybody with 1.5 teacher. We have circumstances now where we may have participation levels at varying locations that create varying levels of need. And if we have to affect this line, I'm going to be a strong advocate for prioritizing based on a participation level of some track record.
Mr.
This is prioritized. This is not going back to everyone having the same level.
Okay,
We're only asking for those additional half positions in this budget for those bands in middle school that have that 300-plus students. This will not give everyone the same level. It would be over 12 positions if I did that.
well, I hate to do it, but we may have to take some half positions from some circumstances where participation doesn't necessarily justify that. We've got to have,
We've looked at that, and actually some of them don't have 1.5 now. They just have 1. And we've been doing that over the past 4 or 5 years, reallocating those positions through attrition
Okay.
into some other places as we've expanded. But some of the bands are just so large, they absolutely need that additional half person there full-time to support that. And that's why Mr. Odom has actually talked about this for a couple of years to support that.
for my fellow board members, I will just share with you, I happen to know, and tomorrow is the big performance at the
Woods Creek Middle.
Yeah, but there's a the Tennessee Education, Music, and Arts Conference is at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel, and they have selected for all of the music educators for the state of Tennessee that are all getting together at this conference, they're going to listen to Stewart's Creek Middle School perform for them. I think it's at 1 o'clock tomorrow. It's an outstanding honor for that program. But the assistant principal mentioned to me when we were doing one of our zoning meetings out there, 40% of the student body are participating in the band program at Stewart's Creek Middle. That's enormous. And it's inspiring, but they got to have the staff for it.
And I've got high schools that got issues too.
Okay.
Very large, and Siegel High is very large, the number of students they take to these competitions out of state. And all, you're sending 2 teachers very often, and there needs to be more. I mean, the arts needs more funding, just to be honest with you. That's kind of where we are.
Okay.
The next one, the ROTC, kind of looking at that, that's one for Blackman High School. The Army helps cover half of that cost. I don't see that as real negotiable. The special ed teacher's 9, and I've got a down arrow there. Can he get by with 8, or will we get enough in, and next year we're going to need 10? But this is not one that can take much cut, I'm just going to tell you. Our growth with about 11 to 12% of our students being special ed, just normal growth, you're going to pick up several. But, I mean, that's one that when you talk to the downward area, you might reduce by 1 teacher or something like that. That's just where you are.
Mr. May I go back real quickly to the ROTC instructor? So if the Army covers half, is the 41,000 the half, or is that the whole?
Explain that.
That's our net cost. They will send us a check every month, well, an electronic fund transfer.
He has to build in the budget that. Though.
Yeah, I put it in the budget at full cost, but this is the net cost. And this, when we opened Siegel High, we did not get any more Army half-supported positions. We did with this. We rearranged.
Why would it not?
Their enrollment
consistent?
is up enough, well, because of budget.
Their budget's changed
ROTC.
too. They wouldn't, I don't know whether you remember, you weren't here when we opened Stewart's Creek High. He had to take the position from Eagleville and left them the alternate, the second person at Eagleville to maintain it, and move the primary one to Stewart's Creek because the Army was in a freeze.
Yeah, the Army had frozen all of those additional positions. This is the first one we've gotten from the Army in 5 years.
Our enrollment is high enough at Blackman, so they are willing to pay half the cost.
Okay.
Good question. Again, special ed, again, that one is, the special ed preschool adding 2 classes, and that's determined by your census data about the students that's not kindergarten age that you have to serve. Remember, we have to serve them from 3 through 21, depending upon that need. Yeah, it's an unfunded federal mandate in this case. So you don't have choices based on the numbers. So that's why I've got an X by that. You also required speech and language teacher, which tends to be one of the highest disabilities for those young children. So again, that's not a negotiable thing too. I think you got to look at that. So
If we're looking at federal funds for both of those lines, Is that yet another place? I understand it's zero, but
We have historically gotten, we get about $100,000 federal preschool grant. That's all. All the rest of it we cover locally. And there's nothing in the BEP formula that generates anything for those normal age children. Now, there probably is in the SPED piece of the BEP allocation.
There's a slight part in SPED, but it's just like when Mr. Odom gives you a student count, when we're saying we're having 43,000 and change, but I turn around and tell you there's 540 preschool students. Those 540 preschool students are not receiving BEP allocation through the attendance program at all,
They're not ADM'd,
or ADM. Yeah.
you know, for that fund.
so this is the line item that when we say that IDEA funding from the federal government should have been fully funded,
Never been full.
it's never been fully funded. This is the line item that would be affected if they would fully fund IDEA.
Now, we also, on those pages, or that page 73,400 function for preschool, that also groups in the governor's voluntary pre-K, along with our special ed. So there are two groups in there. Wow.
Is our special ed numbers going up or down? How are we trending?
We actually were at one time about 14.5 to 15. We actually got down to 11 or so. It's going to be probably an 11 to 12. Would you say, Mr. Gillian, somewhere in that range? We're actually one of the lower ones in the state. Last year, wasn't it?
And it's a percentage of a larger number. And so our numbers are going up, and not, one of the things that's affecting us, that's causing us to have to ask for those additional positions for SPED students, is the severity of the SPED students that we're receiving these days. We've received some requests recently that we've never received before. For example, a deaf ed student that's in Knoxville, but we have to supply 2 people for that person in Knoxville at that location, and we're actually looking at that now because of that student's needs. And their parents live in the Rutherford County, so they have to go to school there. They go to the School of the Blind or the Deaf Ed School, which is Knoxville School of the Blinds in Nashville. But we're supplying personnel to work with those students at those locations, plus paying for transportation and educational assistance as well. But the severity of the students is my point. That is what's causing that personnel increase, not as much as the number of students.
And some of that has been driven by the RTI process that we have to account for the developmentally delayed separately.
Right. The RTI process has been so effective. We've been reducing that number tremendously, and that's allowing us to recover that cost that we've been spending on the RTI from the sheer numbers of teachers that would have been required if we were still at 14% of 43,500 students compared to 10.8% of that number.
And Mr. Odom is on the BEP review committee. One of their recommendations was an RTI funding factor in the BEP, and that was deferred to summer study.
Yet we have a coach and 2 interventionists at every school. You know, so that they're not funding that. They're requiring us to do an RTI program, but they're not funding it.
And we cover it entirely with local funds.
Okay. High school career technical education, Ms. Pilgrim, Mr. Lewis, visit every principal, sit down with them. Based on that, she came up with the number 8.5. One principal has since notified her based on enrollment may not need that half. I think 8's still pretty firm. So you see the X we can't cut, but yeah, we might be able to take away that half. Let's see what happens and see. So it just kind of lets you know. It was based on student enrollment. The STEM teachers, this was the new one. You saw the presentation on Stewart's Creek Middle and asked us, let's take a look at it and let the other schools maybe have a STEM. We have, of the 12 schools, 7 of them have a STEM already, or that they've actually been doing themselves. And to get it to everybody else, it would take 5 additional STEM teachers. you know, at about 307,000. I think it's a wonderful thing to do if we can pull it off. But that would be new, because in the past, what the others have done, once upon a time when the state funded career and technical education for middle schools, you had family and consumer science in the middle schools. State stopped funding any CTE at middle schools. And a number of those cases over the years, you have actually already picked them up and put them in regular ed, and we made them STEM teachers, or use the position, turn them into do STEM in the schools. They had a STEM showcase this last week at Stewart's Creek Middle of the others, and I can tell you some people came back utterly amazed at what these kids, kind of invention-wise, or what we're doing. I think it's an extremely strong program. I hope we can keep it. I think it's worth it.
I hope we can as well, and I think our argument for it is a Chamber of Commerce argument that this is the starting point. These are the seedlings toward the Tennessee Career and Technical program and all of the things that we need for economic development in Rutherford County. We don't start with these STEM programs in middle school, then we are taking away from our economic development.
I'm going to tell you another thing that the principals run into trouble with in middle school and all too. Every teacher is required a period planning every day. By law, every teacher has to receive a planning period. Well, how do you get a planning period for a group of kids? You send them to the library, you send them to PE, you send them to music, you send them to STEM. I mean, the kids, somebody has to take those kids, you know, to give everybody a planning period per day. So some of the things that the schools are so tight, they're having trouble creating planning periods for people. But STEM or extra art, music or something allows them a little more flexibility in the schedule to try to accomplish that. But because by law, you have to do it. So that's your STEM. The guidance counselor, one Rocky Fork and one Split. And I put the X1 out there. One of them, the Rocky Fork's got to be there to be equitable to other schools. The Split was in another case where we're seeing guidance counselors, they're earning another one. They're really at the point of needing another one. I will say, again, I serve on that state BEP committee and have been asked to serve again next year. But what that is, one of the things that several legislatures, they were concerned with enough guidance counselors across the state of Tennessee to do a better job for students because of the needs today. If they were to come out with a fixed ratio for guidance counselors, hello. That's another one of those mandates could hit but we ask for, if you're going to do that, kick the money with it, because that's what the BE committee makes the recommendations to the governor. And I haven't seen his little line items. I don't really know until it's approved what's there, or if it will actually be a multi-year phase-in, or how that might be. But this is minimal here, folks. I mean, it basically is. They need more counselors, no question. The school technology is STSs. What we've got, the middle schools all have one full-time, the high schools have one full-time, so one of these is Rocky Fork Middle, one to provide. The second one would be, they have a half one some of our elementary schools are over 1,000 now, or at 1,000, 900, 1,000. They got a half, some of them, most of those we've been able to get a full-time in, but we still got some large elementary schools that the STS is there 2 days a week, or 3 days a week and swap out. If we could get 2 of them, then we can help with some of the larger elementary schools, get a full-time person there to do it. I was really interested at the meetings we went to at NSBA, Kingsport in Tennessee and a place in Louisiana. And I've already talked with Trey Duke about this. They are using some of these STSs to teach coding in elementary schools, even starting down in kindergarten. I was so impressed. Beautiful. Beautiful. So I can see something. Coding is pre-programming. When you get up in middle school, it is programming, computer programming and stuff. So I saw some real possibilities. We may take a visit up Kingsport or somewhere and look at what they're doing. But again, it would take somebody to teach that. In their lowest grades, the classroom teacher was able to handle it. They bought them some software. And to teach coding is sequencing steps. You know, this step has to come before this one and this one. And so they have jumbled up, and it starts in kindergarten with just pictures. And kids have to sequence them on a computer. And that is pre-coding. But then when you get in middle school and upper elementary, the steps have to lead to solving a problem or creating a new program to do something. But it's a great mind-expanding thing for it, and our kids are going to live in that world. So we need to look at that, but I thought, gosh, that's a real opportunity when I heard they were helping their STSs do that. So I like that. The high school science specialist, we've not had there in the past. But here's the issue. The new ESSA thing was released yesterday. We got to look at it. What the commissioners submitted to the feds. Next year's science adoption with the new standards. High school alone's about 40 science books. You've got different levels of biology, different levels of chemistry, different levels of physics, earth science, all of these, the sciences. We don't have anybody up here handling that. Actually, Kim Day is handling it for us for years. And she's our math person. Golly, math is so huge. She has very little time for science, and that's not her expertise either. She was a math instructor and actually does some work at MTSU teaching math on the side too. But we need to look at a science person out of this office to work with our middle, high school, at least, people. And the thing about yesterday's ESSA, we've known math and English have always been so large. Science will count 1/3 of your accountability under the new, if the ESSA plan is approved. So 1/3 English language arts, 1/3 math, 1/3 science. And that's in your achievement and your value-added pieces.
Mr. Odom, a couple of questions on this. First of all, it's an awfully expensive salary. So I would be kind of curious to know where the numbers came from to justify that level of salary.
Mr.
Okay. Because I've got a couple other questions, they may kind of combine together. So, and I understand with new standards and new textbooks and as many different disciplines and sciences there are, I can see that being a large undertaking. But is it going to be necessary to have that position on an ongoing basis? In other words, you know, once everything's implemented, is that position still really justified? And yeah, again, I'd like to.
If it carries the same accountability weight as English language arts and math, can you afford not to train the new teachers that are coming in, doing the in-service? If we get less Title II funding, these people do a lot of our training with our new people. They're some of our people who actually do the in-services for them. It may just be, from my personal opinion, it may be such a high priority, it may be one of the things you want to keep. But let him tell you why that salary, what we did with it.
I was looking for an opportunity to mention, on these figures, the way Mr. Odom presents this, we look at salary, Social Security, Medicare, retirement, and medical insurance. So it's not base salary. This particular position, I budgeted at someone with an EDS and 15 years of experience, because it will probably be someone with some experience, and 206, these specialists we have on 260-day contracts instead of 200-day contracts, so they can do in-services in the summer.
That's when they do most of their.
And that's what drives up costs.
Is that going to place any, you know, just in coming in the wake of our looking at salary structure and positions and levels and things, is that kind of a salary going to be in direct competition with other positions that might be about that same level?
No, it's the same index. All of our teachers' salaries are driven by degree, experience, and what index they're on. The degree and experience will depend on what person fills the position, and then the index matches the other specialist indexes. It's that I put in an EDS, that many years of experience, but looking at the average people we have in that group of specialists, I thought that was we might hire someone with just a master's in 5. We might have someone with a doctorate in 20, and we'll adjust the budget accordingly.
Looking at Assistant principals, we took it to, one of them's Rocky Fork Middle, which you kind of got to do. I mean, that's the other one was Whitworth Buchanan. Buchanan Elementary's large. Now, grown a lot. So my recommendation would maybe, where one person is at Buchanan Elementary and runs over to Whitworth Buchanan a couple of days a week or so. So if we add one position, we can take the half at Whitworth Buchanan Middle and the half at Buchanan, make somebody one and have the person stay, so they don't go back and forth. So that was the idea behind that one. Substitute teacher pay, that's right, negotiable. That comes from that 94, the higher field rate of 94%. So that's Jeff's estimate on that. Coaching and athletic director supplements, and this is your committee. There's your cost basically for that one, and this is changes to middle school. The only thing that you could do to this one, if we want to implement it, and I think it's a good idea, we need to be behind in this. Do you do it over 2 years or do it 1 year? That's why I've got the arrow there. If we do the whole thing, you've got one figure. If you decide to do it over 2 years, you might half it or whatever.
Well, that's certainly something that the board obviously can consider whenever they want to. These salaries are based on the bachelor in 5, and there's no provision for any increase for these people unless the bachelor in 5 goes up. They don't get anything for additional experience, no matter how many years they might coach. Also, there's more in here than this is not exactly accurate, but most of it is middle school. But there's some art, there's some music, there's some band. There's 2 high school things that one Mr. Tackett recommended to the committee, and one that I recommended that we had just left out of the high school change back about a year ago. And I want to stand as strong as I can for these people, and that's all I want to say right now. But
And Rocky Fork Middle is in there.
yes, and of course that's 15 sports or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Baseball, football, basketball, all that's there too. The certified pay increase, 3% right now. Your cost a little over $6 million there. Again, the state said 4. The state sends you a rate of about 44,000. We have to pick up any difference for any above the state minimum number of teachers. In this particular case, I was reading in Chalkbeat again this week. Blount County's doing, they're planning a 1/2 of 1% increase. So it boils down to this. The only way you can reduce our budget by millions of dollars is people. We can look at this other little stuff, and it doesn't, it's there, but you can't get $1 million unless you start looking at either raises or people. There's just no way to pull it. There's not enough CTE $100,000 or whatever it is to make anything like that up. So will we have to go back and look at 2.5, 2? I don't know. When we get the revenue figures, I'm just saying that's the only place you can do it. And whatever happens here, then will have to happen to classified probably. And that's the same place that you are.
I wanted to say a comment on that. And we've got 2 former teachers, well, 3 counting yourself, sitting up here, and we've been through these things for many years. I would hate for that to drop under 2. I just really.
We're not planning to.
Yeah, I understand. I understand, but we do need to remember. I think one important thing here that if say you raised it 2%, that's forever. It's not just 1 year. And so it's really a lot more money for that individual over a longer period of time, and we need to remember that. And I look, what county did you say? Blount County?
Blount, yeah.
Okay, that's Maryville, right?
Maryville City's separate, I think.
Okay, all right. It's county schools in Blount.
For those of you that aren't from East Tennessee, it's pronounced Merville.
Merville.
Okay, whatever you say. I kind of look at that rather pitiful raise, is at least they were trying to do something. And evidently they're out of money.
And they were cutting 12 teachers. Was that argument? Did y'all see that? They were cutting 12 positions. I don't know. I know the superintendent, Mr. Britt, Dr. Britt. But anyway, that's there to look at. The system changed in high school, and Mr. Estes brought this up, raising from 111 to 113. Basically, could do it over 2 years, but here, you're not talking much money here. You know, the whole 2% is not but 51,000, so it don't help you a lot to do 2 years or do anything there other than just do it. You know, I mean, when you look at that, it's not much money, but it's there. The system in middle schools, again, if you did those, I put a question mark there. That may be, that's only 35,000 if you raise them 2%. And again, I think what Mr. Estes was looking at, and what I was looking at too, is the number of sports that these people have to cover in the middle and the high school. The middle has almost the same number of sports at the high schools. I mean, they're having to cover so many clubs, organizations, and sports. But again, that one's 35,000 if you did that, or whatever you want to do. It's 24 people there and 32 in the high school. Certified subtotal, that's your 110 certified position, $13,881,348. That's an increase. You can see a total. Looking at classified now, very quickly, educational assistants. I put a down arrow again. You got some flexibility here. What I've underlined, you have almost no flexibility. The additional ELL, the 7 at Rocky Fork, the 2 SPED preschool that has to go, you have to have those with the other. So not a lot of flexibility. And those are 15 full-time equivalent. Actually, you're talking 24 people because they only work the 10 months. And so Mr. Sandvik has to adjust that to full-time equivalency.
Mr. Odom, since we have Mr. Goulian here, if we have to make decisions between certified special education teachers, you know, where we've got 9 and 2 and 1, the preschools, you know, we probably can't affect, but the 9 we talked about the potential affecting versus the EAs. And Mr. Goulian got away. Okay, all right, but that's fine. But you get where I'm going? Which is the greater priority?
One of the things that you need to understand up front is that sometimes there's a requirement for an EA to be in the classroom. For example, we're adding an additional SPED preschool classroom. Well, there's a mandated 2 educational assistants that go along with that and a speech pathologist as well because of the language learning that those students have or language disabilities that they have. So when we add that classroom, that actually adds 2 teachers and 2 EAs to meet the mandated time. So in order with what I'm saying and what's in this budget was the minimum that we could do. The EAs serve other positions as well. We have to have the teachers, obviously, because you have those needs within the classrooms. But many of the educational assistants come along once again with those severe educational students or those severe students that have those issues that require for a one student educational assistant to help them with their mobility or to help with them with life functions. And that's where that happens. Mr. Sandvik can attest to the fact that probably once every 2 or 3 weeks, I'll talk to him and say, I have a student that moved in from XYZ state, and one of the requirements, so I'm allotting X school to hire an educational assistant through the special ed department to perform these services for that student. So my answer is,
Both.
We have to have both.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Odom's not going to present something to you that's not minimum because he chooses.
I know, but he put a down arrow there, so, you know, I had to ask the question.
Well, some of that is a little anticipation for if you have to assign a full-time EA to a student, which we have some of those.
Yeah.
You're making a guesstimate about how many of those you're going to need. So, you know, there may be 2 or 3 in there that's part of that guesstimate.
There may be 1 or 2 that may not be called upon within that next school year, and
Very little adjustment you can do, though.
Understood.
This district has an example of how valuable the EAs are. I believe it was during Mr. Watson's tenure, and we laid off because of budget constraints, a little over 100. And our academic status tanked. And I think we found out very, very quickly how incredibly important the education assistants are to our district.
Well, when you look at all the additional things that they're having to do now because of all the legislation, even since then, I'd say that has risen even that value considerably over the last few years. Would I be
You
wrong
have-
in that assessment, or?
You have students that are tube fed, you have students that have to diaper change, and I understand, we have to do that, that's part of what we do. And you get, when some of the student come, you have to do it, you just have to do it. It's the right thing to do, and you have to do it.
Mr. Blair was absolutely right. Many of our educational assistants are certified teachers.
Well, no, that's one of the things we talked about.
Many of them.
Salary review is when looking at their wages and indexes, so.
They're very cheap teachers.
Inexpensive.
Yeah, there you go. I'm sorry, but Larry, you said much better.
The line for nurses, too, there could be more there. I know it's been one of your things for years. We currently have the full-time equivalent of 47.8. You'll have 47 schools next year. Rocky Fork Middle will get a full-time. The other one is, there are some procedures that the legislature's passed in the last few years that a nurse has to be at the building. If you go on a field trip and you're taking a medically fragile student, she has some of those PRN nurses she has to send down to go with that kid. You cannot deny them going on a field trip. So you have to, somebody needs to stay at the school with the other one that's at the school, and somebody has to go on the field trip. So we have to have some flexibility to pull that off. So this again is really, really minimal, and I don't see any way to cut that, and it could stand more. And sometimes you have to, after school starts, you just have to do it. Yes, sir?
If I may, just the nurses, the sped positions, all like that. If we wind up with the students that we have to accommodate, we will accommodate and amend the budget. We have always done that.
It's your best guess, well ahead. And the clerical staff, Rocky Fork Middle, 2 positions there. There's nothing you can do about that one. Custodian 5, there's 3 at Rocky Fork. Mr. Sandvig has a formula. Every principal will tell you I could use another one. I'm going to tell you that. The 2 growth here are basically you're going to add square footage to Smyrna Middle. You're adding square footage to David Urey. The formula calls it we add additional people. So again, that one is really minimal at the 5 to try to pull this off.
How did we do John Coleman with the new part and the old section that we're still having to keep up?
Actually, the one that comes from the federal program there, they're handling their own cleaning in that part, as far as I know, aren't they? I think, is that right? Did they take care of their cleaning, or how are we?
That will be doing their part, but we still need someone
In the other part, too.
in the part of the building.
She's working that, been sending some over part-time, so.
I could see a need for an addition there that we might want to consider. Because that old part has got to be difficult, just in itself. I can't imagine somebody just doing part-time over there, so.
Maintenance staff, we added the 1 back. We had 2 in the early one you saw in March, 3. They're currently 54. If we add this one, add 3, we'd be at 57. We got to have some additional. Do you want it to be 3 or 2 or whatever? Anyway, that's just, again, another piece. Classified percentage raise, that one, and the reason I arrow down there is if you go to teachers to 2.5, then they'll probably be 2.5. Or if we go to 2, it'll probably be 2. So that's all that is. Page 3, medical insurance increase for staff on page 3. That's cost is set by county insurance, and so again, 12%. Earlier you had 15%, I think, in March, didn't you? So he's already been able to adjust that based upon what we're hearing now. But anyway, that's a pretty firm figure. Science textbooks, it's large. It goes really 3rd grade all the way through high school, about $1.9 million. This year was less. If I had a hammer, Mr. Young saw this too, the Chamber of Commerce Construction Company is really encouraging us to try to begin some of that to help and motivate kids to go into CTE construction. It teaches fractions, really through manipulatives and things like that. 50,000 is only a pilot. The city is spending several 100,000 more, even with less. They're actually fully implementing with the build house and the manipulatives. But anyway, that again would be a new program. That's why the question mark is there. SPED, contracted high service for high-cost students, 100,000. You're going to have to amend this year's budget. So that's not negotiable really either. Vocational instruction materials and supplies for middle schools. Actually, I said 12 a while ago. It's 11 that have it. They asked for up to $40,000 apiece. I said, no way. If we're going to add the 5 STEM and cover the 6 that already have a STEM for 11, if you gave them $10,000 apiece, because now they're having to come up with the money whichever way they can. Basically what it is that they're trying to do. If we give them $10,000 to use STEM materials, that's going to cost you $110,000. It's a fourth of what they asked for. You know, I mean, it's got to start somewhere. We've never done it before. That's why you see that question mark there. Nurses, SNAP software. We may be able to take Indian fund balance or some this year and go ahead. That's on 15,000. So we might be able to click this one totally off by going ahead and doing it. It looks like we may be able to now. E-rate is connectivity. AT&T is our E-rate provider, our internet provider. That's kind of a set cost based on students, how many places and all. So $50,000, nothing much you can do about that. Legal fees for SPED, cases, court cases, expert witnesses, 150,000 more. Actually, we're going to have to amend this year's budget because last year's was too low. So just to let you know, that's probably not anything we can do about that one. Trustees commission, absolutely nothing you can do about that one. That figure is there. Maintenance additional funds. He asked for 100,000. He needs 100,000. I put the down arrow right on. You can give him 80, or we give him 50 again. But whatever the current amount received for this year is $3,385,549. That's the current budget. But they asked for 100,000 more. Again, listening. Transportation, and that was a reduction. That figure may go up. That negative number, and this is because putting in our GPS, we recalculated the mileage. Our initial things is maybe $130,000 reduction. It may be even better when the year ends up and you can look at it. So that's a really good one. New bus routes. Again, he initially requested 11. I've got 8 in one SPED, 8 transit. Approximately 50% of our students ride a bus. Just to kind of give you round numbers. If we grow by 1,500 students, if 750 ride a bus, and it's a 92 passenger bus, you've got that. Very often we can run the bus 2 routes, but the other thing that's hitting him this year that we haven't had before, he's got a new school that affects you in your bus situation, plus the congestion here in Murfreesboro and Smyrna. To get the kids home, you can't keep them on a bus longer than an hour and a half. That's by law. The congestion to try to deliver the kids, to keep them picking them up so early in the morning, it takes more buses just to deal with congestion. So it's not an unreasonable thing. Could he get by with 7? Maybe. But I don't know. I'm just telling you. You can look at it and do the math yourself. Rate changes with contract drivers. We kind of put them at 2.5%. For every 1%, it's 150,000. Do you give drivers the same as you do the others? You could do 2% there or whatever. But again, that's an adjustable figure for you. Looking at page 4, utilities for Rocky Fork Middle, $216,500. Can't do anything about that. Debt service for energy management digital. That actually saves us money. But it doesn't technically have to be paid until 18-19, right? I don't see any need waiting to 18-19, maybe a worse year based on what we're hearing. But if we had to pay half of it this year and half for next year, you could. That's why I got the down arrow. But by the end of 18-19, the 500,000 hits. Okay? Go ahead and get it out of the way, or divide it over 2 years. What do we need to do? We'll see. And down at the other, I think, is the committee that Ms. Moore's on, was to try to do some balancing, and I'm going to turn it over to you, if you would, Ms. Moore, and kind of explain to your other board members what the committee's been working on and the sheet they have in front of us.
Sure, and I think I'm gonna need Mr. Sandvig to probably jump in, obviously, for a lot of this, since he's our numbers guy. You've got two spreadsheets, and it's a lot of information and a lot of data, so I know Mr. Sandvig's gonna wanna elaborate on that some and answer questions, but, you know, I think going into this, there are so many different things that we wanted to try to look at in terms of salary but the biggest focus obviously was, did we need to come up with more of a standardized or an index in of itself and steps for salaried and hourly classified employees. So in looking at that and going through everything, we came up with, or I should say Jeff came up with a game plan to try to kind of level the playing field, I guess, if you will, if that would be a safe way of saying it. And you'll see he's got 3 things listed here that we talked about. Obviously, the standardized index probably was the biggest, and there's a pretty large number attached to that. So I know Jeff's gone back to the drawing board and done some work on how we might be able to more equitably distribute that over more than 1 year if it's not something that we're able to get approved for the budget for the first year. We did also talk quite a bit about, and this came up a little bit earlier, about how we're paying our EAs, especially the special education EAs, and the fact that we have so many of them that are actually certified, you know, degreed teachers, and whether or not there should be something we should look at there. And a lot of this focus too came into play, I think, because of really with looking at specifically the custodian and the cafeteria worker positions. I was very pleased to find out Ms. Barnes had done a lot of homework on this, and we appreciated it, that when it came to the custodial and cafeteria workers, and were there other categories, educational assistants, that when she compared with other counties throughout the state, that we really are on the high end, that we're paying those employees better than most, if not all, of the other school systems that she talked to. So we really did I had a lot of conversation and drilled down into then why are we having, one, such a terrible recruiting problem, but also two, the amount of turnover that we're having in those positions. And I think a lot of the turnover kind of drilled down to, and this is mentioned on here, that we were losing so many of the ones that specifically are in the part-time positions. Do you want to, Ms. Burns, elaborate on that a little bit?
Part-time, and then those that may just work 9 or 10 months because they're not paid during the summer. And so they seek opportunities that are full-time 12 months in some cases. There's also ample opportunity for employment in our county, in our district today, and that was not the case several years ago. So we don't have the number of applicants for those positions because they have opportunities in other places.
If I understand correctly from conversations that we had, I mean, I know your staff department mentioned that we've got custodial positions that we can't fill. That there are times that they get posted and we don't even get applications for. So again, you know, it's a dilemma, you know, because when you look at where at the top of the hiring scale, can we justify paying more? But I want Mr. Sandvig to kind of walk us through the classified pay, the step system that we came up with, and how these numbers shake out, because he can explain this a whole lot better than I can.
Mr. Sandvig, I don't know about the rest of the board, but I know about myself. We've had so many figures. I think I think I would appreciate maybe you explaining the organization of this chart. And then let's put this on to the very first thing that we do next time. Is that agreeable with the board? We have some other things here that including the safety coach, we're going to have to discuss at some point. Do you have a word of explanation for this? I'm sure excellent but complicated chart. I think so.
Okay, the page that has mostly black numbers on it shows where we are right now. The left-hand side shows the pay rates for the different jobs and the grades for our hourly classified. The right-hand side shows shows the implicit index, the implicit steps that are built into that schedule. Just comparative purposes for y'all. The sheet that has bluey purpley on it, or yellow, and orange.
I know he's colorblind.
I tried to make that blue, believe it. I thought that was the purest blue they had back in the day.
Well, since you can't see it, let me assure you this is a beautiful piece of paper right here.
But anyway, one of the comments 5 years ago, I presented it in the budget process, a set of standardized step and index for that group of classified salary posts. The board came back wanting, well, what if we could do something for all classified? So, okay, the red numbers on the left-hand side are this standardized index and steps that we can use for both salaried and hourly classified. So we would be combining, we'd be doing some combining and all that, but the red numbers are the standardized steps and index. And if that's enough.
He backed into that.
Yeah.
What are you making?
So everyone, it was held harmless. That's why there's really cost associated with it. No one would get less a raise next year than he or she would have gotten if we hadn't made this change. If you're expecting a step increase, you will at least get the same dollars under this. That's what drove the cost. And if that's enough, we can leave it for next week.
Well, it's only enough if Ms. Moore says it's enough. Are we okay there for now?
I think so. I guess the only thing, I know we had some conversation at our last meeting before we closed up about how soon we needed to have this pulled together and ready to talk with the commission about. So it was,
We're fine with that.
okay. Mr. Sandvik?
We had the
fine,
Okay.
$720,000 estimate. The only reason we got the down arrow, he did do a little bit of work. He could delay the year steps and cut it back to 360,000 and you do it over 2 years instead of 1 year. You know, that's just, if you gotta do something, you can do something, but back in, but leave the index maybe, but back off on a number of years.
Right. But no, Mr. Chairman, I totally agree. There's, this is a lot to digest on top of all the numbers and everything.
And we probably need a word or two here, and maybe somebody will need more than that, to see if they have any questions about what Mr. Odom read in these line items when we didn't comment at that time. I would kind of like to see, if it's appropriate, the results of a raise of 2% and 2.5% the next time we get together, which is next week, I guess. I'll go ahead with something else, but then we can come back anywhere the board wants to come back to. The safety coach, our coaches, when we left the other night, there was kind of a general consensus that, you know, we were going to do something here, and then we might have a motion and we might not. So, do we have one?
There's one in this already, okay? But I think we may need more than one. But in this one, because it's a supplement, there's one.
One is a supplement stipend, not a full-time position,
No,
correct?
nothing is, it was what was discussed about the 22% index.
Since you were involved in the committee as
I was a listener.
Secretary. Well, excuse me,
That's Mr. Hodge.
you were involved as the secretary, but would, based on the comments of Mr. Hodge and Mr. Young and the other members, would you have a recommendation, Mr. Odom?
I don't think one is enough. I think you need to look at least 2 to 3 of these positions and either divide the sports up or divide by parts of the county. And I want Tim Tackett to be a part of that, to look at it, because I think there's just so many sports you can't cover. I personally do not recommend putting a safety person at every school yet. I said last night, one of the things, I want a fresh eye to look at that school and see how they're doing comparatively. But I think this is something we look at, and then maybe we designate, maybe not at 22%, school. But as I listened to the committee, y'all talked about let's pilot and see where we are. Let me default to you because you're on the committee.
I just figured if we're gonna do something, we had to start somewhere. That's why we came up with number one, I guess.
May I share a personal opinion that I like your idea of specializing? That if you have three, I believe Chairman Jordan last night said we had 7 major sports issues.
Concussion.
Right,
related.
concussion-related sports in each of our high schools that maybe 2 and 3, but I would think we'd at least need 3 and let them specialize, but that's just my opinion.
All those sports are at the middle school level too, every one of them.
That'd be one of the biggest needs based on.
So,
We also have some seasonal offset that if we had 3 positions and they had 2, 2, and 3, then there may be the opportunity to say, you know, your focus is kind of this activity because it's in this season, and then you also have this activity which is in an offsetting season or something of that nature. Mr. Odom, though, in passing, you mentioned eventually more of these positions may be where we go to, but we want to start and then evaluate, but then you said it may not be at the 22% level.
Because if you assign a safety person for one school and they don't have multi-school responsibility, maybe that's not a 22% supplement, maybe that's a 10% or a 15%. That's what I'm saying.
My challenge is it's hard to go backwards.
Well, you still might maintain the people that do multi-school.
Okay.
You may want to take your major high schools and designate somebody that, I don't know whether you realize it or not, you don't supplement your ADs at your high schools now at all. Maybe that AD at the high school is one of their responsibilities. You build them in a supplement of some percent, and then they also become the safety lead. I personally like the responsibility to look at multi-schools from comparison, so you're not stuck in your own, hey, this is the way we do it situation. You know? So I think you're going to have both.
I think the board still has a policy in place that the athletic director has to be an assistant principal. Is that?
That's the issue. But again, somebody signs off, they are the assistant principal. But very often assistant principal now, lately they've been hiring people from academic background because it's so much as they force it, so some of those are not good.
We looked at it, didn't change it.
I think it's correct.
Yeah, I think that is correct.
Technically, your person is, athletic director is the assistant principal.
Right.
But I can tell you, principals assign somebody else to come speak very often with Mr. Tackett, simply because that person may not have any sports background.
Ms. Moore?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've been thinking about this a lot since we talked about it last night, and the committee first presented it, and been really, really excited about it. I mean, I think this was a tremendous, probably one of the best reasons for a committee to be formed and to look into. And I will be the first to admit that when it comes to coaching and or understanding and ability of physical training and that kind of thing, I'm probably the least qualified on the board. But I do look at this from the perspective of, risk management and so on. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but again, just kind of for our audience too, and in looking down the road to presenting this as a part of our budget to the county commission, I think there's so much that could be accomplished through this role or these roles that even go beyond, and I know the committee discussed all these things, and I'm probably trying to make it a much bigger picture, and I understand their reasons for keeping it small from a budget standpoint, but when you look at it from a pure risk management standpoint, I mean, what are we trying to accomplish here? We're trying to accomplish the end goal is for as few injuries to our student athletes as is possible. And again, looking at it from that perspective, if this coach or these coaches or this program saves a child from one serious injury, that serious injury and what it could have cost, and that's not cost is not the most important thing, don't misunderstand me. We need to keep our kids from getting hurt, period.
But let's face it, when sometimes those big hurts happen, it hurts the school system fiscally. If there's a lawsuit, there's attorney fees, one claim like that, it costs this school system much, much more than one even full-time salary for somebody that's really qualified. And the more that I looked at that job description last night, and I'm kind of trying to put myself in the shoes of that person, thinking, okay, well, I'm a high school football coach, which I know is a pretty funny vision, but, you know, I'm already employed full-time with the school system. I'm looking at all the things that I don't have in front of me that were listed in that job description. There's no way. There is absolutely no way. I cannot imagine anybody, even for that amount of a stipend, even being able to remotely think about accomplishing the things that were on that job description. And to me, and again, just my opinion, if you start spreading it out, I think it's going to get even more muddled, if that makes sense. Now, the specializing, absolutely. I think you need people involved that have the expertise in the football and that have the expertise in the cheerleading. And so I kind of started just asking myself that question, you know how we all like to play that game that, hey, what would you do with the money if you won the lottery? And so it was kind of the, hey, what would we do if everybody understood the importance of this and how much money it could save the school system in the long run? Not to mention, you know, just again, the injuries themselves. And in a perfect world, to me, what we would do with this position is that it would be a full-time central office position, because you look at all the administrative things that needed to be done, the things that I think we should have been doing all along, like tracking of the injuries and everything. We can't figure out where we're going until we know where we're at and what we're working against. And tracking those injuries, I think, is critical, and it's going to be critical from the standpoint of being able to go back and show that this has been effective. So in a perfect world, I think we had a full-time person here that has all those credentials and criteria, and then that you have a specialist out in the field with these individual coaches, that you've got a baseball and a football. So those are just kind of my thoughts for what it's worth. I think we try the shotgun approach with the stipend positions. I don't know, I'm struggling with it.
I just worry about the time involved and the duties of one person, regardless of how well qualified. I mean, we've got, I'm not yet really absolutely sure of the number, but 19 or 20 football teams. Central doesn't have one. And all 20 have at least one cheerleader squad. Some of them have two cheerleader squads. All of them but Eagleville, I believe, have girls and boys soccer. All of those have got to be visited, addressed, equipment's got to be checked. And there's going to be some driving time involved. And it's going to be after school. I don't see how one person is going to be able to do that. Now, and then maybe y'all disagree, I don't know. The AD, in many cases, is also a coach. And they're certainly not going to have time to fool with it. It's difficult. I think Mr. Tackett, I know Mr. Tackett because he contacted me today. He wants to go forward with this. And of course, he'll do whatever we ask him to do, but he's ready to go. And I think the committee's ready to go. At least start somewhere and get the ball rolling somewhere. But the chairman does not make motions unless it's a desperate situation. So somebody else is going to have to do this. Okay, let me say this about salaries. A little bit of me, I'm not, you know, the 22% guy necessarily. You know, why do you take an individual that can do this and it's not going to be on the front page of the newspaper every Saturday and Sunday of the game that he lost the night before, or marching into the playoffs and that sort of thing. But he's only going to be doing that for about, counting spring, fall practice and games, and preseason practice. Only going to be doing that for a maximum of 20 weeks. Where these people we're talking about hiring going to be pretty much a daily thing. So I don't know about the salary. That's what you want to do, but 20% of whatever, we need to ask Mr. Sandvik to plug it into the the supplement line, I guess.
I have one plugged in, if you want more than one.
Yeah, well,
Let us know.
well,
We just know that cost is close to 10,000, plus you're gonna have mileage and all, so.
Right.
Somewhere between 10 to 15 on the model that the committee talked about. Now, if you salary, something else, you got a different situation, but, it's not hard to build in, just depending on what your desire might be.
I think the issue is that our desire is way more expensive than what we maybe are capable of at this point. So maybe, Mr. Odom, if you would be willing to make a recommendation, then maybe we can discuss that
I
and go
don't
from
talk
there.
to Mr. Hodge and Mr. Young in the committee and see, because I may have misinterpreted or something, I really want to know what y'all think, where do you want to go? I mean, we can put it in.
we don't want to go off the rails, and we've got time. Just because people want to do something right away, I think we want to make the right decision absolutely as best we can. And it's not like we don't meet again in the next foreseeable future. When is it? 13th?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay, so we could have a recommendation that night.
Well, it's the situation we might have then too. You hope the revenue piece isn't, the increase in this is, what you're looking at tonight is about 25 million. So, increase, so, well, it's really not that much, it was from budget time, it's really more like 11.
Increase. Because we have to adjust out that transfer to the building program.
Okay.
Yeah, so it really is
We borrowed from ourselves for 11, I really don't want to go up on that, because you're gonna open Rockville High School 2 years, and you just dig yourself.
it's currently 24.16 million.
So that's, probably not gonna be 24.1 million in revenue cut, that's just out of sight.
Well, are you comfortable with recommending something on this one budget item next
Well, I
week?
can certainly, I really want to talk to these
Sure,
guys.
and I understand.
They study it more than I do.
That's who I talked to too.
I guess whenever how I envisioned it first is that we were just looking to try and get a certified coach in place, and let them really run with it and develop this into what it needs to be. 'Cause I don't think we really know yet. So that's where I thought initially, until we discussed me last night, and I'd see where it's going to be overwhelming. We need additional people.
Certainly the first time around, it's gonna be overwhelming, isn't it?
Right.
You walk into the building and tell them who you are, you're there to look at their football helmets, they're gonna think you're out of your mind.
But initially, that's just what we were thinking. We just need to get somebody certified to kind of give us some guidance on where to take this program. We know we need to address the issue. And we're addressing it correctly, maybe not.
Okay, we will,
That's the $1 million question.
all right, if it's all right with the board, we'll wait till the 13th and see what kind of recommendation these gentlemen come back with. Are there other questions over, I would think now would be a good time on any of these items that you want answered tonight, that can't wait till the 13th or shouldn't wait till the 13th?
I have a question on page 4. The $500,000 payback on the energy management. I'm certainly for pay it back right away, and yet if we're strapped, is there any reason from a financial or from a fiscal perspective that says, oh, well, next year we're going to have to pay back this, so yeah, it's really important we do the whole 500 if we can, or is this a place that, because, and my trade-off is the substitute teachers. We made a difference right there. We went from 88% fill rate to 94% fill rate. It cost us $280,000, was worth every penny. We've got people in classrooms, and we're not borrowing from other classrooms to cover classrooms. We made a right decision there. However, that's a one-time thing, and now
It should be recurring.
well, yeah, okay, it's a recurring thing,
Yeah,
but
recurring.
that's gonna be our thing. We're not gonna have to increase that much more because we're at 94%. Now, if we get to 95%, 96%, we're not gonna see a big increase there. I guess I'm just coming around to, do we take that 500,000 and make it 350 and 150? This year, next year? Is there a reason to do that, or no, knock it out when we
One
can?
of the things I think is important that we do, because this borrowing, these projects affect our operating costs. We have since we started this program, looked at our time, our payoff to our projected savings. I really would like to keep that. Now, the reason we can probably trim that number back, we won't have this project complete and have to start the payments right away. That's why we can cut it back. I also like having a little buffer in there in places, but yeah, that's one we can cut back without too much fear and trepidation.
Mr. Money is not due until the entire project is complete. We don't have to start making payments. So it depends if we stay on the schedule, which we're pretty much on the schedule. And I'm not sure, I need to go look and check it out when the completion date is on that.
We have been reimbursed for like $1,082,000 just in the last, we got it in March.
So, I just need to look and bring something back tomorrow night.
All right, or maybe next week, because tomorrow night's regular meeting, let's look at it next week when we go budget again. The other thing is, I'm more interested in putting STEM teachers in place and potentially increasing STEM material investment in future years. I really, really, really want the STEM teachers in place. If they find PTO support, if they find local business partner support or something of that nature. And so as opposed to the 10,000 per school, I think let's let them get their feet wet with some, and yet with a plan that we're going to increase those materials, again, thinking as each school develops their program, they'll understand even better what it is they need, in materials for that program. And so I saw that right there. Got to have something in that line for the materials, but we may be able to get away with less than 10.
They list things like 3D printers and stuff early on, but you're setting up a mini physics lab at middle school level is kind of what you're doing.
Right.
Inclined planes, screws, what we're talking about. That they need some help to start some things like that.
Okay, last thing, everybody pulling in the same direction. If our certified and classified, we're going to look at those at 2.5 and 2. Do we also look at the rate changes with the bus drivers from 2.5 to 2?
We had it 0.5% less than the others, so we could look at some of that.
I think we're all pulling in the same direction, and if we're all sacrificing, then I'd like to see the 2.5 and 2 for certified and classified, and 2 for our contract drivers. Only for the reason that we're all pulling in the same direction, not because I got it out for anybody.
I believe Ms. McLeod, I wish she was here, she could answer this immediately. I believe there's 2 in it for bus drivers.
Currently with.
Isn't that what Mr. Snell recommended?
He put in his budget up to 2. So that, you know, that one may be pretty easy to take a half.
Take a half and what?
Well, as you know, Mr. Jordan, we can lower the numbers. It's real hard if we raise them at this point, as in dealing with the commission.
Well, we had, okay.
It's $150,000, it'd be $75,000 less, I can tell you right now. Because it's 1%, $150,000 for every 1%, we go from 2.5 to 2, you're gonna have $75,000 reduction in your total number there, roughly.
That's not a lot of money in the big scheme of things, and I think these bus drivers are having a hard time finding
Oh,
people.
I agree, and they, of course, we met, I don't know, Ms. Michaels, what, 4 or 5 times? And, they were okay with that.
If this other state bill passes in 19, that you have to, with the seat belts, and it moved along too, there are gonna be a lot of cases where you, instead of 3 to a seat, 2 to a seat, and it's gonna start hitting you in 19 especially.
At the national convention, Jim Estes laughed at me when I sat in a bus seat with seat belts. I realized why he laughed. They're not gonna work. So I just, at least not in that configuration. It's not gonna work. But I understand there was a bill. Was introduced yesterday, so, I don't know what will happen with that, but, now it's not immediate, and it's buses purchased after 2019?
It'd take 10 years to work through.
Do what?
It'd take 10 years to.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. I didn't appreciate you laughing at me either, by the way. I'll let you know that.
Anytime.
Okay. Is there anything else for now? Of course, we got a meeting tomorrow night, a regular meeting.
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
All these additions, the up and down arrows, and that's in the percent increase for the year? Okay. And so we're looking at 3.7% increase.
But you really have to adjust out that 11 million that we transferred to the building program. We used 6.2 million from fund balance to balance our expenditures, our revenues to our expenditures. But we transferred 11 million to the building program. So we that's a non-operating piece we need to exclude. Our real budget is 341 million for this year. I'm trying to figure out a way to adjust that out and get us a total on that in this report.
That looks sound pretty reasonable to me.
Anything else? 5 o'clock tomorrow, Ms. Michaels, right? Okay, I was going to say all minds at ease when Ms. Wise was here, but she's gone, so I'll just say adjourned. Thank you.